Welcome to Organizational Sherlocks, the podcast where business meets psychology and your organizational puzzles meet their match.
Join us for captivating stories and practical solutions to unravel your toughest challenges.
I'm Dr. Elizabeth Fleming.
And I'm Morgan Ashworth, your guides to a prescription for business success.
Let's dive in.
Well, following off our last episode, which was about the myths versus the truths. So we're being some mythbusters last episode about IO psychology. Now we're actually going to talk a little bit about the different tracks that an IO psychologist might follow in their career.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think that there's a lot, as we mentioned in the last episode, a lot of different ways that IO psychology can be applied in a lot of different roles. So I don't know about you, but I think using kind of more of a structured approach might help. SIOP, for those who don't know, is the Society of Industrial Organizational Psychology. And I think it would be a great thing. Maybe we use their categories to explain kind of what might be in each of those. What do you think?
I think that's a great idea. I remember, I think it's a couple of years ago now, I did a whole posting campaign on my own personal LinkedIn utilizing PsyOps, different career paths an IO psychologist can go. And in it, they talk about education. They and myself talked about education, talked about like different job descriptions you might see or job titles. And so we would like to get into the nitty gritty of each one on later episodes, but for now we figured it'd be best to give you a brief overview of each.
I think that sounds great. Well, if it's okay, because it's the beginning of the alphabet, or the beginning of the alphabet, and because it's an area I work in, maybe we can start with academia. What do you think?
I think that's a great idea. It's actually the first on PsyOp's website. It's right next to me here, so I think that's a good one to start with. So knowing you're the one in academia, what do you want to tell us?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, when we think about academia, obviously many of us have been in school for quite a long time, right? And some people want to teach, some people do not want to teach, but it's more than that, right? Sometimes people are professors in a program, sometimes they're researchers and they're predominantly focused on research. Sometimes they become department chairs or deans or whatever it might be, right? I mean, imagine a world where like the deans and all the people making the decisions also have an understanding of IO psychology. Like how pretty cool would that be, right? So I think it's pretty broad within the world of academia. It's much more than just being a professor. And sometimes you even hold duplicate roles. Like I am a researcher, professor, and I manage our dissertations or the research within the program. So it's a lot more than just being in front of a class and teaching a concept.
Yeah, I think you can think of the professorship track that you can take as any type of professor, but the difference is with an IO psychologist, you actually might be able to apply some of those business learnings to the processes in the university. And not to say that's only IO psychologists that can do that. I'm sure anyone will have process improvements or developments, but it is a more natural skill set to an IO psychologist after all of the education that was pushing that type of research and application. And so I think academia is a wonderful track if you really want to continue making that difference and staying within that research-based role as well. So making a difference on other IOs entering the field. So being that natural mentor or the research side and natural, university professor track.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and there's so much more that goes into all of that too. But if you do, and we'll put a link to the SAP website so you can see what some of the more traditional titles might be that you might be looking for in academia, like assistant professor, associate, full professor, all of that kind of stuff. So we'll make sure that we put that up there. But it doesn't mean you couldn't even rise to, vice president or president of a university. You never know. So some good ones out there, something to think about.
Yeah, I think that's a good one. Next, which I think might be next in the alphabet too, funny enough, but second on PsyOp's website, also a good transition from Elizabeth to me, because both of us work in this field, is the consulting track.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, I know we've talked about it in a lot of previous episodes, right? typically, not typically, that's not the right way to say that. A lot of times though, people are working as external consultants. So other companies or organizations are hiring you for projects, for hiring help, whatever it might be. But there are also consultants, IO consultants that work within organizations, oftentimes larger organizations. So I think that's important to keep in mind. You might be consulting, doesn't mean though that you have a title of consultant. I think sometimes that kind of gets a little bit weird. Titles are weird. Let's be honest.
Not every title is specific to one of these tracks, and not every title that we're going to talk about is only what's out there too, if that makes sense. There's going to be other titles. I mean, for one, I think of like an internal consultant. I think of an HR business partner, for example. So it's more about the development side of HR, and less and like you're consulting HR, but you're the business partner. You still work internally at the company. Sometimes though, you get hired externally too. I would say that a lot of IOs go into the IO psychology field and like, I want to be a consultant. I tend to caution people there and tell them, well, why don't you focus on learning first? Yeah, focus on learning first. Be an internal consultant. Don't be afraid to be that. You're still an expert in some way, shape, or form, but it's a lot harder to develop your ethos, your ethics, your showing that you have the reference and the experience if you're going right from education to consulting. Then if you know that you've had a number of projects you've worked on, perhaps that was during your education. That's a great show of experience. Perhaps it was after, but I do feel that you have to be cautious if you want to go straight into external consulting, because you're going straight into owning your own business potentially, or working under another business that is consultant based. But if you're going straight into owning your own business, you're going to see all the other needs: bookkeeping, sales.
Oh, it's a lot.
Elizabeth does it. I do it. So
it's a lot, that's for sure. But no, I think you're right. I mean, there are really large consulting organizations. McKinsey is one. Deloitte is another. Like that, there may be options to get in there earlier than maybe like when you might want to start your own practice. But so there's definitely options within consulting, and you might, if you do go to one of those companies, or even a smaller consulting firm, you might start as a project assistant, or kind of really just trying to understand and gain some of that experience by working in a consulting firm. So know that that's an option. It doesn't mean that you have to jump from education to owning your own business. You can if you want. It doesn't mean you have to. There are steps that you can take along the way.
Yeah, and I recommend taking those steps. I like to note that though, because I've tended to need to caution a lot of my mentees against going straight into self-employment with consulting. It's always a good option to learn under someone else, especially, Deloitte, for example, under a consulting firm, and learning how to do it the most beneficial manner. They've developed a system. Why not learn from them?
Absolutely. No, I completely agree. All right. I'm trying to do like the alphabet in my head. I think that maybe it was intentional on SIOP's part that they put everything in alphabetical order. Now I'm starting to think that I didn't put that together until right now, which is great. So the next area is government. So tell us a little bit about what you know when it comes to working in government as an IO psychologist.
So I know neither Elizabeth nor I do work in government, and that's why when we do talk about it in a more thorough manner, we're going to bring someone in who works in the government-based manner, the government track of IO psychology. So to me, government means you're working in the government.
Yes.
How easy is that? Not really. But you're working with the government, you're working in the government, and that could mean you're a governmental contractor at times, but most often it means that you're hired internally at the government. One place I know that loves hiring IO psychologists is the military.
Yes.
So
IO psychology has roots in the military, so it makes sense.
A lot of like the motivation type like studies you see in military-based or seeing like military environments. Not to say all of them are, but I've seen a lot where they're utilizing surveys or testing out certain theories. They're happening in a military environment, and they do that because you have people who are in a specific order, and it's a little bit easier to track where
Yes.
like there's lots of people that share the same role. There's very specific hierarchies that already are developed to work with. And because of that, an IO psychologist is a really great person to have in, say, the military, because you're helping develop people, you're helping determine what those tracks should be. Sometimes you're helping with, military processes. So I do know military is one that's really popular with government, but there are plenty of others too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And like you said, I'm like not someone who works in, whatever in government, but a lot of consultants, when you want to kind of blend things, work with government agencies. So I think that's important too. Like, even if you don't work in the government setting, you may, as you said, consult or have a contract with them.
Yeah,
which
be
is
a
cool.
contractor.
Mhm.
I might have actually two people to talk about the government path with, knowing that, because one of them's from the military, like worked in the military, became an IO, still is in the military, helping specifically, veterans and or current military members, and then the other one who is a government contractor specifically.
Yeah.
Both of them in the IO field, both of them having IO psychology degrees, whether that be masters or doctorates, and so they might both be a good fit. So I look forward to reaching out to them.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I think that sounds great. So I think this one fits you probably better than I in this season of my life. But industry is kind of the last category that SIOP really kind of promotes or puts out there. So internal IO psychology roles could be in human resources, different departments, operations, all of those things. So tell us a little bit about what you know when it comes to a career in industry.
Yeah, so I would say, while consulting is broad for the fact that you can, work with so many different companies on so many different areas, usually it's on a people operations basis. When you look at industry, though, you can become a lot more specific more quickly and specialized in other areas. I actually alluded to this in our last episode. I know we talked about ergonomics. Well, if you get involved in ergonomics as an IO psychologist, you might be under the HR realm, but you also now might be under the safety realm. So you actually develop a greater expertise on the overall business scape than the IO psychology scape would maybe allow. Meaning, IO psychology is specifically talking about, the people operation, the people thought process surrounding ergonomics, and HR is making sure there's compliance there, while safety is one, compliance, but two, safety, as it sounds. And so you develop a broader range within your expertise, ergonomics being one example. Like I said, though, you can become extremely specialized when it comes to industry. You might fall into consumer psychology. So in the sales marketing realm, another thing I noted last episode, you might become an HR administrative individual. You might move up into the HR business partner. Sounds like we talked about that.
It's like a trajectory, right?
Yeah, there's a trajectory. There is a lot of crossover between the different paths, but all in all, the idea of the industry path is you stay within industry, you stay within a business, and you grow hierarchically in that business. So who knows, maybe one day you become the chief people officer like I was, and then you transfer into chief operations officer like I am now. And so I've, moved away from just people and overall operations. And, another individual might become a president or a CEO because they have that understanding. They have the business acumen in the financial sector, the people sector, the manufacturing sector, the logistics sector. There's a lot of areas that you would have to have a business acumen in to be a CEO. So when you think of the track you could take, there's so many different paths within industry. That IO could naturally fall into. Oftentimes, though, we see an IO psychologist IO psychology professional. You don't have to be a full-on psychologist. I would say people with master's degrees oftentimes go into industry. You'll see them in HR roles. You'll see them in DEI roles. You'll see them in psychometric type of analysis roles. Learning and development,
sorry.
I was going to say learning and development especially. But Elizabeth, what do you have?
No, I mean, I think I've even seen IO professionals get into like in the technology space, working with technology systems that are like based in the HR area, so an HRIS system or payroll system or something like that. And I think that's one we don't typically think about. But it's having that knowledge of the people, right? And what's happening for them. And is the system going to help or not help? And can we help like implement that? So I see that. I see change management as a huge thing.
Continuous improvement, lean manufacturing. Again, we alluded to a lot of this in last episode. And I think it's because oftentimes we see the most people in industry that are IO psychology professionals because there is a lot more companies out there to work for than there are, say, universities to work for or governmental contracts to get.
Well, and frankly, as a consultant, you can't do everything, and what is it like? You can't be necessarily the master of all. Like you just can't, because you have to have a niche or a specialty that you do, you know, and kind of make a name for yourself in that way. So it does. I would say industry for sure seems like you might see the most number of people in a wider variety of roles.
Yeah, because you have the most job titles available to
Absolutely.
And those job titles are ever developing. I mean, I'm constantly even looking like what job title should I assign a position here or here. And that is one thing I do help organizations with too. Hence why I tend to focus on it internally at my organization as well. But you don't tend to see IO psychology professionals working in a small company as often as you see a larger company. But I would say that it's more common to be in a large company. But if you target those smaller companies, you're going to make a lot more effective change and become a much broader expert. What they say is jack of all trades, but master of none, still better than a master of one. That's the saying. People tend to forget parts of the saying. And so it's the idea that you can develop a very broad expertise and then you have experts under you that help with those individuals' areas, whether that be a consultant you bring in. So for example, I'm helping develop something for the company at the moment, and it's a lot of work. So I have an expert under me doing it, but I'm making sure it's aligned with company needs. So it's the software system technology side we just talked about. But then I'm also have a HR manager under me. So that's the people operations expert, but I'm overseeing them. I have a lean manufacturing expert. Our manufacturing manager does lean manufacturing. So he's my expert there. So I have someone to look to in each of these particular areas to make sure I'm successful. Same thing, I have an expert under marketing. So
absolutely.
That's what happens when you grow.
The other thing I'll say too is like titles are something that are really weird. And again, probably a different episode, but like in the academic world, like being an assistant professor doesn't mean you're necessarily assisting anyone. It's about, you know, rank or academic rank. So you typically, you know, go from instructor to assistant professor to, you know, associate professor to full professor. And then there's kind of like, that's it. Right. So when you're looking at roles, if you're thinking, I want to do, you know, I might want to be I might want to work at a university, but I might also want to work in consulting. There might not exactly be a one-to-one where an associate professor is the same quote unquote level or experience level as an associate consultant might be, if that makes sense. So I encourage people not to get hung up on some of those words because they don't always mean exactly the same thing.
Pay more attention to, I would say, your tasks, your skills, and your salary.
Right.
And your salary. To an extent, not to say like your salary should be the most important thing, but it is important naturally. Yeah. When you pay attention to tasks, skills, or responsibilities, skills, and salary together, that really makes more sense than job title.
Yeah. Although, I mean,
help like people into collections of groupings.
I don't know. This is a conversation I go back and forth on all the time, Morgan. Like, are titles important? Are they not important? And I've been in situations before where I'm like, I am doing so much more work than my title actually like says. And then I think, you know, I've been told, oh, well, titles don't really matter that much. It's really the work you're doing. And I'm like, yeah, but if I like want to go get a different job, that title matters. So I go back and forth on it. So again, not this episode.
I think they matter, but they just don't matter as much as even if your title's lower, but your responsibilities and salary are both higher, then at least you're getting paid. I think titles are more so to put people into brackets of individuals, and it helps with hierarchical and organizational planning.
For sure.
Not to get off the topic that we're
I know. I brought us down a completely different path, but I think that could be a really interesting, probably somewhat heated conversation with people at some point. I know it has been in the past, but I don't have a one way or another. I'm still developing my opinion on that topic. So
I think it's a gray area, just like most of IO.
Yeah. Well, I think this is great that we're kind of setting it up. Like you said, the next few episodes, we'll be bringing some folks on and or really kind of digging deeper. You'll get a chance to meet our kind of IO folks behind the scenes too, joining us in some of these episodes. So we hope that you'll come back and join us for that. But I think we wrap it up for today. Sound good?
Sounds good. I look forward to the later episodes. So if you're wanting to learn about one specific path, jump on. The next 4 episodes are all going to be the individual paths that we've just touched on.
Well, listeners, this concludes another intriguing episode of Organizational Sherlocks. I'm Elizabeth Fleming.
And I'm Morgan Ashworth, reminding you that the journey to success is an ongoing investigation.
Remember to stay curious, stay strategic, and keep utilizing insights to decode your business mysteries.
Join us every Tuesday for your next Who Done It. This is Organizational Sherlocks, closing today's case.
We'll see you next time.